Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to SurrealDB stream number 25. I am joined today by Albert from SiteForge. He's going to be talking about a project that they're working on. A team of 6 people are working on this incredible project. I'll let Albert talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Albert, great to have you here. Before we jump into that though, welcome to everyone. To this stream. Let us know where you are calling in or listening in from. If you're on YouTube or LinkedIn, I think you can leave comments and it'll come to us on the stream. Great to have you all here. So, Albert, give us a kind of brief introduction to what the project is and what challenges you were facing as you were building it.
Yeah, sure. SiteForge is an AI wireframing and website planning tool. Some of the challenges we faced are more around the AI side, trying to get the content generations really well, trying to optimize that as much as possible, and providing value to our customers, and just being able to iterate fast and stay ahead of competition.
Awesome. So when did you start building this project? When did you start developing it? And you're now a team of 6, is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
So when did you start out?
Yeah, I started developing SiteForge in December 2023, and we've just launched our first MVP around the February the 1st, and then ever since then we've been iterating, releasing some features, and recently we did a launch with our AI wireframing feature, and that was pretty good. So that's where we're at right now.
Awesome. I'd love to dive deeper into some of that AI tech that you're using behind the scenes a little bit later on. I guess the prototype in February, that was, let's say, roughly 3 months work. What technologies did you decide to start on, or did you try it out initially? And also, actually, before we come to that, what technologies have you had experience with in your career before starting SiteForge?
Yeah, sure. Which one would you like me to answer first?
Go to the journey about how you got there first. Let's start with that.
Yeah, sure. I started programming since I was about 9 years old. I started a business around 15 doing website development. It merged with an SEO agency that was focusing on the SEO aspect, and we had a good combination of skills there. Ran that for a few years, and started being interested a lot more in AI and how it can automate certain tasks. And so we were running our digital marketing agency, building lots of websites, SEO optimizing websites, and doing that whole process for clients. And I realized there's a big opportunity in terms of AI and how it can fit into the process of marketing agencies. So we basically decided to try and build an AI tool that would help automate some of those tasks within agencies, and even just help businesses in general build their websites, plan them out, do SEO optimization, that sort of stuff. And in terms of the technologies we've used since then, I've touched a bit of everything. React, Svelte. We've used AWS, Google Cloud, DigitalOcean. Touched a little bit of everything. A lot of websites we ended up building with WordPress, some of the Shopify, just different sort of CMSs and stuff. But in terms of what we're using currently and the tech stack, that we are working with at the moment is Vercel for hosting deployment. We're using OpenAI for some of our AI services. We're using Svelte. I'm not sure if I mentioned Svelte. So that's our front end framework that we're using. I guess those are the main few at the moment.
Awesome.
And SurrealDB is obviously a database.
I mean, that's a good one to hear. We'll talk a little bit more about the SurrealDB and how it kind of sits in that stack. And I'd love to know more about the AI side around OpenAI, but also you said for some of the AI. So I'd love to know what else you're using there. But I guess it's an interesting area to land in terms of AI wireframing. What was you talked about the journey, but what was that initial idea that made you think, there's this gap here in this market, and I'm going to go for this?
Yeah, sure. So, one of the main problems a lot of people, anyone that has to build a website, has is they initially just have this like sort of blank canvas. They're not sure what to really design, what to plan out. They're not necessarily sure on the pages that they might have. Typically you have to do a bit of research to figure out what people are searching for and that sort of stuff to be able to like sort of plan out the ideal structure for your website. So we kind of realized, AI can help with that process, not only just with the wireframing and the content, but also like planning out your website. What's the ideal site structure that you should be using? How can you target the web pages so that people that are searching for certain keywords can find those web pages?
Yeah.
So yeah, we basically ended up building the early product that initially just did the sitemap generation and then content generation.
It's an interesting area, isn't it? Like you think getting a website up is simple. There are loads of tools, as you mentioned. You mentioned WordPress and Shopify, and there's Squarespace and all these different tools for you to build websites. But to plan it out and to properly think about how to get the actual results that you want from that site is a step further than that. So it's an interesting space, really interesting space. So you mentioned AWS, Google, Docker, all these different platforms. I think that is an area where a lot of engineers are in the same boat. They've built or had experience with many different platforms, many different services, many different tools, and some of them are in the position where they have many different microservices and tools and frameworks and connectors and APIs powering their applications at the moment, and that requires large teams. So this is you're a team of 6. That's impressive to be building an application of this type. So how did you manage to focus and keep that technology stack simple and therefore keep the team size smaller in order to do that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I'd say, having a good tech stack is very important. Whatever allows you to, stay lean and iterate quickly and go through that product development cycle is very key. So we end up using, front-end frameworks like Svelte, for example. It's very easy to learn. New team members can, find it quite easy to work with. It's pretty efficient at everything. A lot less boilerplate with your web projects. In terms of like hosting, Vercel's, Godsend is very perfect product in terms of being able to just, push commits to your repository and goes live to customers, quite
And
quickly.
you don't have to worry too much about the performance side of that as well.
Yeah, it's right. It's very quick. And as well as like, the database technology that we use, has to be able to like iterate with us and, should be able to update, the schemas and, release product updates without worrying too much about migrations and that sort of stuff.
Yeah. So obviously, SurrealDB here. I'd love to dive more into what led you to find SurrealDB, what interested you about it, and then we'll talk a little bit more about kind of what aspects of the database you're using. But yeah, so first things first, what led you to find Surreal?
It's honestly hard to remember, but it might have been a Fireship video.
Okay.
I think he released a video on SurrealDB, and I found the features around multimodality in terms of like being able to store JSON, being able to retrieve like nested JSON objects, graph relations, vector embeddings, and that sort of stuff. Just it kind of felt like a one-stop shop for everything that you want your database to do. So that's kind of like the reason we chose it. But previously we were using SurrealDB, Superbase, and there was a lot of like issues that we were running into in terms of like how the SDKs were built and a bit of limitations around what we were able to do. We ended up having to do a lot of like extra queries to query data, whereas SurrealDB, the query language, allows us to run it on the client side. So we can just easily do queries and kind of merge certain operations, so it's a bit more efficient.
Yeah, so that was going to be one question I was going to ask actually. So are you using SurrealDB as a backend database with an API that connects to Svelte, or are you using it directly from the client and pushing it?
I'm using it directly from the client.
Okay, awesome.
In most cases, sometimes we require like certain operations to be done on the backend for security, like authentication and certain types of cases where you have to store stuff on the backend. But yeah, most of it is done on the client side.
Awesome. You mentioned authentication, and that's an area we are building on, improving on. We've got the version 2 release has significant features in that area. What is missing for you on that side? What would you love to see on the around the authentication side in order to kind of make it even easier to build on top of?
Yeah, I would say I think I was able, I ended up doing a migration. I'm going to talk about it a bit later in the pitch. But there was like, we had to, move over, I guess, from the Superbase, which I guess had more of a like a built-in authentication system, and just implemented our own sort of stack with Auth.js and Svelte
Okay,
and just SurrealDB. So that's
awesome.
kind of what we ended up doing. But I personally don't find it too difficult to integrate Auth.js with SurrealDB. They have like an adapter for it as well, but I ended up kind of writing my own sort of thing.
Awesome. Hey, look, this has been a good introduction. I've got lots of questions, lots more questions to ask, but I'll let you take it away. I know you want to explain the platform and how you've gone about thinking about building things. So yeah, Albert, go for it.
Awesome, sounds good. All right, great. So yeah, this is my presentation why we switched from Superbase to SurrealDB for building AI products. Um, Hold up. So yeah, so SiteForge, in a nutshell, is a tool that allows you to plan out your website through generating sitemaps. Once you generate a sitemap, you can click onto a page to immediately start generating a web page wireframe. And as that web page wireframe generates, the AI will also start to generate content for that web page. And our vision, long term, is to be able to turn SiteForge into an AI co-pilot that helps you run and build and grow your business. Um, and yeah, so I'm going to go into a product video and just talk a bit about it as we're going through. So every designer's has to build websites, but building websites can be a slow process. We're not always sure necessarily what to design, and we always start with a blank canvas. So we're not exactly sure, what the first steps might be. That's why we created SiteForge. It's an AI tool that will help you plan out your website. And as it's planning out your website, you can easily click onto a page to start generating a web page wireframe. And once that web page wireframe's done, it will start to generate content for your business that's tailored to your brand identity, all within seconds. And if you don't like something, the idea is that the AI will be able to assist you in rewriting and optimizing your website. And this will help you rank on Google for as you're doing SEO optimizations to your website. So that's a short product video. But yeah, I'm gonna get now into why we chose SurrealDB compared to Superbase. So some of the main benefits that we got out of SurrealDB is that whenever we had to do certain database related features, I'd say around 40% of we had like a 40% time saving in terms of developing those sort of features that were required. We have to do way less backend APIs because everything is like client side authenticated. We can actually run SQL, like the SurrealQL on our client side while being secure at the same time. And that database as a backend paradigm has really helped us being able to iterate a lot faster. And certain query operations are able to be merged, and just like less code is easier to maintain for everyone on the team. So some of the features that we love about SurrealDB, I view SurrealDB compared to Postgres as like what JSON is to CSVs. It's more native and expressive. So, when you're working with programs, you're often dealing with objects and JSON-like objects like arrays, and date times and durations and all that kind of stuff. And being able to like deal with those nicely within JavaScript and TypeScript is really nice. Being able to like do stuff like graph relations is very critical, and especially for our application, vector embeddings have been very valuable in terms of being able to, for example, we have an AI memories feature, which I'll talk about a little bit in the next slide. But being able to switch between like a very typed and schemaful sort of table, and being able to switch between that and schemaless tables has been really great. And just being able to query and index all of the data, whether it's in nested objects inside of the tables, is very critical for us. So one of my favorite features about SurrealDB is being able to use record IDs. Typically in other databases, you deal with like foreign relations. They're a bit limited in terms of what you can do with them. SurrealDB just treats them as like queryable records, is what I would describe them as. If you want to just get the user ID, you can just ask to get the user ID. But if you want to, get a name of a user, maybe you're trying to render some posts on a blog, and you want to pull the author's information. I find that feature very valuable and efficient in terms of just being able to write one query that gets all your data that you need from the front end. The query expressiveness has been really great. So, if we're doing expressions and queries, and we have, we don't necessarily want to pull all the data. We just want to maybe know whether a certain page has some content. We're able to do that with SurrealDB's expressions in the queries, and it's very nice. The Superbase SDK, for example, wouldn't really allow you to do this sort of stuff, and the JSON features were incomplete, I'd say. And being able to just do these sort of operations on the database side while only returning like a boolean, for example, makes systems a lot more efficient. Another feature I love is being able to do these nested queries, and because they're all secure, they're using permissions. Being able to query parent records, and that sort of stuff is just like, I wouldn't have even thought that something like this would be possible without SurrealDB, and that sort of stuff is very valuable in terms of being able to just precisely request what you want from the database is very great. We use vector embeddings for like our AI product. So we want our customers to be able to like learn, submit their preferences. Our AI has to be able to like update memories, retrieve memories based on what it's trying to generate, and those have to be done on like relevancy. And just having like a vector embedding system inside of the database is very valuable for building our product and making it better for our customers, providing these features. Typically, I know that SurrealDB has some of these features, but I much prefer SurrealDB's way of being able to query these things in whatever way you like. Is very, very great for productivity. So yeah, I really love the database as a backend paradigm. You have fine control over permissions. If you want to hide a specific column, for example, the user's password from being able to be queried by the front end, that's something you can easily implement and is like very fine-grained control. And that means we can spend less time thinking about like building backends and these APIs that typically you'd have to do in the past. It's a lot cleaner to just be able to query it from the database. There's also probably less network overhead since it's just connecting directly to the database. Obviously, it's pretty secure. It's very tightly knit to the front end. So whatever data that we want, we can just request it from the front end. It means we're just iterating the front end, iterating the database, and that's kind of the main focus that we have to do, rather than trying to iterate the database while we're iterating the back end and the front end. So it just gets complicated, as you're kind of going through that. So in terms of like authentication, from Superbase, we moved from Superbase's like built-in authentication and just moved to Auth.js. I much prefer like having authentication like in-house and being able to control it a bit more. We use SurrealDB's defined token feature, which allows us to sign JSON web tokens on our application, and then SurrealDB can authenticate the user with the user ID. It wasn't too tricky to support. All we had to do was, when we were migrating, was mapping some Google user IDs and creating an account table, which integrates with Auth.js, and that was pretty great. And there's also very nice built-in crypto functions for password hashing, which a lot of databases don't really support these sort of things. And SurrealDB is great at like just providing these functions that are pretty much necessary in any modern application. So in terms of developer productivity, our team loves SurrealDB. Like we love using it. It's very expressive, and allows us to iterate a lot faster. We're able to get a lot more done, like per sprint cycle, because it's highly flexible and versatile. We can easily add new features, iterate existing features, and the Surrealist application has been very valuable for allowing us to quickly iterate and test queries, test schemas, and try out different sort of approaches to solving a specific problem. So our migration, we decided to reuse SurrealDB's native IDs as opposed to UIDs, which we were using with Superbase. We had to map, all these records. So we had to basically export all of our data, write a script that converts all of the UUIDs to new record IDs, and just convert some of the types and just optimize certain stuff that we maybe left on the back burner. That took about a day to write the script and set up the CI/CD in order to be able to deploy our schema each iteration. And in terms of like refactoring some of the code, it took about 2 to 3 days, as well as like a lot of that was actually spent, like a day or two was spent on authentication. So in terms of SiteForge's future roadmap, we want to build an AI-first CMS, a modern, flexible, AI-powered website builder that allows businesses to be able to design, build, and deploy their websites within minutes. SEO Copilot, which comes up with SEO strategies, keyword research, and competitor analysis to be able to optimize your website to target search engines, and so that way your customers can help find your website easier, as well as an AI design copilot that helps tailor the web page designs to your brand, your fonts, your styles, and all that sort of stuff. So some feedback on SurrealDB. I think you guys have had unbeatable customer service. I've never been in a Discord community, that has been with their staff being so helpful and supportive. Typically every other business's Discord I've been in, they often don't reply. Whereas your team, actually takes the proactive, stance on helping people. The community is great as well. But the amount of times I've had to rely on your staff to, solve a bug or maybe find out an issue, they've been able to help with that so much and save a lot of time. Docs have obviously gotten a lot better over time. And yeah, so some things I think would be really great is giving us some cloud beta early access. We'd love to try it out and see how it goes. We'd really love an AI assistant for writing queries. That was one thing, Superbase had, and I think they had sort of like a benefit in the sense that SQL and Postgres was a well-known language, so the AIs were a lot better at understanding it. But having something like that for SurrealDB, would be very valuable, and that's one of the main reasons we used Superbase before we moved to SurrealDB. It was just a lot easier for our team to be able to write queries and understand all that stuff. So that would be a feature I would love. Some better tooling would be nice. I know it's a early stage sort of product and it's iterating quite quickly. But having some features, for example, with independent schema management, where we can define our schema and just be able to send that in our CI/CD process, and it will just like sync our database with the code, so like infrastructure as code sort of thing. And yeah, some better SDKs for auto-generate typing, which our team is actually working on a library that will allow us to convert SurrealDB queries and the schema and match those two together in order to produce generated TypeScript, which will hopefully make our app a lot more reliable and find us bugs that we thought we didn't have. So yeah, I'd like to open up to questions. So yeah, let me know what you guys think.
Awesome. Well, I've got a lot of questions. Let's bring up the chat dialogue online as well. So we've got Sandro's94 online. Welcome, Sandro's94. He's saying nested data is insanely valuable to being able to direct access in one go. I guess that brings me on to one of the questions I had actually, which is what balance, because you're coming from a relational database like Postgres. I know Superbase is the layer on top, but at the end of the day, it's Postgres and it's relational. What balance of schema and schemaless were you using, or are you using now? Is it all schema? Is it some schemaless? And also, when you were kind of bringing this data into SurrealDB and prototyping in those early days, did you benefit from schemaless at all whilst prototyping before moving to schema? What's the balance of that?
Yeah, I'd say right now we're actually like 100% schema full, except there are certain columns where we use like the flexible objects in order to store some data. in terms of like schemaless, I actually find that feature very valuable in the prototyping sort of phase where we can run queries in the sandbox, and we're not really trying to care about the schema at that stage. We're just trying to see, you know, how to write the certain query, and just being able to do that without necessarily having a table set up is very great for
Yeah.
that early stage iteration. So I'd say the schemaless is really good for when you're prototyping, and then the schema full is like good when you've got like a sort of system set up and you just want to stick with that.
Awesome. We've got another question here from Mr. Roven. So which persistent solution are you using? Are you using distributed at the moment? Are you still single node? How are you running this right now?
Yeah, right now we're a single node, just running on Railway app. That's what we're using at the moment. But it's not a huge fuss to us at the moment in terms of trying to like scale and making it distributed. But I'm hoping that's something that Serial Cloud would be able to help us with, and just so we don't have to think about that sort of stuff. We could just focus on product.
Yeah, that's awesome. And look, I heard your request at the end for Surreal Cloud. So we've got some. We'll be onboarding people in small batches, so we'd love to have you on in the early stages of Surreal Cloud while you build this and test it out as well. A couple of questions around the JavaScript SDK. So this is something we're working on a lot internally. You've probably seen development. So we've got the TypeScript SDK. The latest JavaScript SDK is now at 1.0 beta. What fill me in, because I'm not fully understanding of TypeScript. I'm not a TypeScript user actually myself. It's pure JavaScript and then Rust. But so what's missing on the TypeScript binding side, and how that relates to queries?
Yeah, sure. So right now we're actually using the raw query syntax where you just pass in a string of the query we want to do, and right now there's no typing for that. That's actually we're actually building like a Rust crate that will take in serial QL files and output. You'll compare it against your schema and then output generated types for TypeScript, which you can use for. You just basically pass in the query as a string, and it will map that specific string to generated types on the front end. So that's what we're working on at the moment to just help make things a bit better. In terms of the SDK, it doesn't actually I guess it provides like an any type as far as I've used it. I'm not sure about that 2.0. I don't think it has changed as far as I'm aware, but yeah.
We'll definitely check that out and talk more about that. So the new JavaScript SDK has support for special types. You can now say, I want the record ID and I want a date time here, and you have an understanding of those types when you're sending and bringing back from the database. Bit more difficult when you're using the raw query type, so that's something we can definitely look into. But yeah, interesting, really interesting. Are you using Surrealist right now to look at visualize your data, or are you just using raw querying?
Yeah, we use Surrealist, both like for local development where we just want to run the database locally for our app. We run like test queries on the sandbox and that sort of stuff. I even have a connection to the production database as well, awesome. With a different connection. So I find that quite valuable.
Brilliant. We've got another question here. First of all, Anthony Ettinger, hello, great to have you with us. We've got a question from Mr. Roven again. Can you compare, or do you have any idea of kind of the performance gains that you've seen with SurrealDB over Postgres and Supabase? I guess that comes into questions as well, right? Because it's not just performance on the tech side, it's also performance from how quickly you can iterate. So yeah, I mean, focusing just on the tech side to begin with, do you have any performance gains there?
Yeah, I'd say one of the main pages on our application involved loading a lot of pages for like our sitemap feature. That, for example, we had to actually break that down into multiple operations with the Supabase SDK. They didn't allow us to run raw SQL sort of queries where we kind of want this more complicated query where we're trying to retrieve some data, do some expressions, and retrieve subrecords and that sort of stuff. So being able to like actually merge those into a single query improved our performance, and just being able to just like do a single network request and get all the data that we want back is very great for us in terms of performance. But also obviously the iteration is just a lot faster. Like we just test the queries locally, You use schema lists and stuff when we're testing, and just being able to do that process like really quickly. The database has become a lot less of a concern in terms of how do we implement this certain feature. Now it's just like, we just do this, so it's a lot easier for us.
Awesome. Mr. Raven has just come back and said query performance specifically. So on those, I think you answered that kind of because you're having to split those queries up. But query performance for similar queries, let's say, between SurrealDB and Postgres/Supabase?
It's not something that we've like benchmarked, but I'd say comparable, probably possibly faster. I'm not entirely
Yeah.
sure on that, to be honest. But
Okay.
I wouldn't say there was a downgrade or improvement or anything
Okay.
like that specifically, except
Awesome.
for those cases where we had to merge
Yeah.
multiple queries.
That brings me back to another question I had then, which is coming from Postgres and Supabase, you don't really have, I mean, I know you have JSON fields, but it's really, you've got set columns and you're storing your data in those columns. And as you said, you've got the foreign relations through an ID or the joins. And as Sandros94 said earlier, nested data is insanely valuable. That's obviously a change, right? It's not just a shift from Postgres to Surreal. It's a change in how you do record IDs, as you mentioned in your presentation, but also how much have you moved to kind of storing nested data? And then I'll follow up with another question in a minute to do with what kind of models or data models are you using in SurrealDB? Yeah, but to begin with, how much have you moved to nested data and how much does that bring to you as a team?
Yeah, so I would say like, there's a use case both for tables and sometimes you actually need nested data. So for example, when we're rendering wireframes on our product, we have like nested blocks and that sort of makes up the design of the web page. And, that sort of stuff is very suited for, nested queries. It's more of like a JSON object. And sometimes we want to be able to query that data inside of there. So I feel like there's a use case for both of these things. You kind of want that table. You sometimes want that embedded data, and sometimes you want graph relations and that sort of stuff. And even like vector embeddings are very helpful. So it's really just like having a database that can allow you to do whatever the product needs without having to complicate it or do these extra queries because the SDK doesn't support it very well, or
Yeah.
even the database itself doesn't treat these things as first class features.
Yeah, interesting. That brings me on to that second part of the question, which is, so you mentioned vector right now, vector embedding, indexing. You've mentioned the record pointers. Are you using time series data at all yet at the moment? Are you using the full-on graph relationships?
We use graph relationships, I think, in like one or two areas of the application. Like where you got those like many-to-many records.
Yeah.
So that I think it uses it for like memberships and organizations where we want to have
Interesting.
like users to be able to be part of multiple organizations, but or multiple organizations can have users
Yeah.
as well.
And that
So
is a
doing
really
that sort of stuff.
complicated. That's a really complicated problem in something like Postgres or MySQL, where you have to then have a middle table. You've got to link IDs. The join becomes very complex. I presume that's a great simplification on top of that.
Yeah, it's just like one query. You just basically have like an edge table, and it just helps connect these things in
Yeah.
a nice way with the query syntax. So it's a lot better, I'd say.
Awesome. Awesome. We've got another point from Mr. Roven. I think he's, I'm going to presume, really keen and interested to know more about this. So would love to see a blog post about how you join those queries with SurrealDB over how you were doing it with Supabase. That'd be really interesting and something I'd love to read as well. I want to dive down into a little bit of the kind of tech stack around SurrealDB. So you mentioned you were using auth.js in order to handle the authentication. It's really interesting to hear that you actually like to control and have control of that yourself rather than push that off to a service. On the AI side, you mentioned OpenAI. You said you weren't just using OpenAI. So what is the tech stack, if you can go into it a little bit more, what does the tech stack around the AI side of things look like?
Oh, we're actually using OpenAI for all of our like AI at the moment. But we have plans to extend that outwards to the Llama 70B
Okay.
that came out not too long ago. There's certain stuff that OpenAI's APIs are missing in terms of being able to guarantee the correctness of the LLM's output. So being able to like ensure that the right keys that were requested were generated by the AI, enforcing that sort of generation where you basically prevent the model from outputting invalid tokens. That's like one area that we're exploring.
Awesome. That's really interesting. I mean, it'd be interesting to know when you get to that point whether the SurrealML functions would benefit you in any way. Maybe not, because it's more for running against data, but it'd be interesting to see whether that could be used to simplify that process as well.
Yeah, I haven't had a deep look at SurrealML yet.
Awesome. Well, when the time comes, we can definitely chat more about that. Look, the SurrealDB is really the success is a testament to the community, to the developers using us, building on top of us, telling us where we can improve. And I know you mentioned at the end there, improvements to our JavaScript SDK. We've got some model coming very soon, which will enable you to more simply write SurrealQL or help you with writing your SurrealQL. So that's definitely on the roadmap as well. And cloud, as you know, we've just launched access to that recently. What else is missing? We love hearing feedback from our developers, our customers, our enterprises on what could be needed to kind of make this an even better database than where it is right now. So what else is missing that you didn't put on that slide?
I guess I'd have to think about it. So I did mention, an AI assistant, which you spoke about, independent schema management. So like just being able to define our schema as code and just being able to sync that with our production database. One feature that one issue I had was when I delete a field or create a new field or update a field's default, it doesn't actually apply the default. And you have to kind of do that process manually. I think that's I'd expect it to at least set the default. That makes a lot of sense to me. Just because you sometimes don't do that, and then you get some errors on the front end because it fails to serialize correctly. So that was one gotcha that we had, I guess. So hopefully something like that comes along. That'd be great.
That's interesting to hear. It's something we're looking at. Obviously, just to explain to those who don't understand why it's built like that, if you change the schema and you've got millions and millions of records in a table in a distributed context, that can be a day-long blocking task, or it'll fail to actually ever succeed because there's too much data. So as a result, you as a developer can choose to update groups of records in batches. But we also totally understand that, and that heavily relates to the schema upgrading that you mentioned as well, that those two go side and side. And if you're coming from something like Postgres, when you make a change, it locks the table and it applies that change. That's definitely a gotcha, as you put it. So so definitely something we're looking into to make it work in both the smaller scenarios where you want to apply it to everything always, and then the larger scenarios where you want to have that choice over how you run it. I don't know if you know, Albert, much about SurrealKV, but we've got a question here from Sandros94, which is when SurrealKV will be released. Do you have any use cases for it at SiteForge or running on SurrealKV at SiteForge?
I haven't had a deep look at it at the moment. I assume it's just a key value store that's pretty fast and efficient. I can imagine there'd be some nice use cases for it, especially once we start going down the CMS route where we want to be able to have our customers pull CMS data like very rapidly and cached. So I think there's some use case there potentially.
Yeah, I mean, just to people who are listening who might not know what SurrealKV is, as Albert said, SurrealKV is a replacement for our storage engine, which is currently RocksDB, or you can choose, but RocksDB is the main storage engine. It's fast, it's on par with, it has slightly different characteristics. I think the main feature is being able to travel back in time performantly. So being able to say, I want to run this query to fetch this table, let's say, or this web page, this CMS page, I want to do that as of last week, so I can time travel and I can always see that version. So it may be interesting. It's obviously a very niche use case, beneficial to certain applications, not necessarily beneficial to others. But as you say, yeah, exactly. The performance is something we're working on, and
So does it allow you to query like historical data? Is that
exactly,
correct?
exactly. So you just update
Oh,
your
okay.
tables as you
Yeah.
do normally right now, but you can then go back and query data and the graph and the records and the relationships and everything, schema, as it
Yeah,
looked
we
like
actually
in the past.
definitely have a use case for that. At the moment, we're actually manually storing versions of different iterations with like regenerations on the AI.
Interesting.
We are like just manually storing that at the moment, and having something like that seems like extremely valuable because we can just
Awesome.
basically, it's very valuable for us in the long term where we want to be able to fine tune better models based on customer preference data. So having this sort of stuff that we can view historical versions of a web page and see how it evolved through time, that just seems like a very valuable feature for us.
Exactly. That's the plan. I mean, look, we're development on that is progressing nicely. We've got 2.0 SurrealDB coming out. It's just an alpha right now, so coming out soon. That will have SurrealKV built in as a standard. Not in beta still. It's still in development stages, but it will be a standard working storage engine. Many other features as well. I think importantly, stability, performance are some of the big things in this release, and yeah, some exciting things to come around the cloud as well. So, as Sandra said, version controlling on a CMS can be very important. It can be really beneficial.
Hmm.
In
Yeah,
fact,
100%.
I was just recently working on our financial model here at SurrealDB, and I wanted to go back to a version from November last year, and that being able to offer that in your application, be able to go back in time, it's something you get used to when you look at things like Figma or Google Cloud, but offering that in any other application can be hard. It can be a lot of engineering or development effort, and we want to make that easy. We want to be able to make you able to time travel in your application effortlessly for your users and effortlessly for your engineering team as well. So yeah, do you have any other? I mean, we're 45 minutes now. Crazy, time flies. Really interesting to hear how you're building on SurrealDB. I'd love to get you back in a few months' time to see, how that's going, what additional features you found or enjoying or started using that you weren't before, and would definitely look to get a blog post up about the comparisons between Superbase and SurrealDB and how the differences in queries and writing those queries was from an engineering point of view. So we've got one other question here actually. Sandro94 at SiteForge. Do you take advantage of multiple namespaces and databases at all?
Not at the moment. So we're just using one database for our entire products. We find that easy to iterate with. I think it'd be cool if there was a way to potentially be able to query between databases. Maybe the record IDs get extended with the database name or something. I'm not sure, but something like that would seem cool. But at the moment, I guess because of that, we find it, I guess, easier to just keep everything in the same database.
Awesome. And that, I guess, when you're doing multi-tenancy, multiple organizations, accounts on your CMS, they have you have an account table and they have individual account IDs, and you're filtering on that with the permissions.
So we don't have like a CMS yet. That's like in our future plans, and that's
Okay.
something that we could probably take advantage of. Using namespaces and databases to do that sort of partitioning. But yeah, at the moment it's just all one database for all of our users.
Awesome. Hey, look, this is really interesting. I love the use case. I love the challenges that you faced and how you overcame them. It's really interesting to hear that. And I think for anybody watching this on YouTube later on, if you've got questions, post them in the comments, and we'll answer them as best we can at that time. Otherwise, if you've got questions just generally about SurrealQL, SurrealDB, anything you've heard today, jump on our Discord, and as Albert said, we'll be helping answer those questions all the time on there. And if anything today has sparked your interest in terms of a feature, a request, and there's some improvement around the SDK, then we'd love to hear from you. So jump into either SurrealDB repository on GitHub or onto some of the specific SDK repositories, which you can find on the link at the bottom of the screen. So yeah, thank you to our watchers, our listeners today, and thank you for the questions as well. Albert, thank you for this. It's been incredible to listen to your journey about how you got there and how you built and then rebuilt on top of SurrealDB. And we'd love to have you join us again in 6 months or something to see how that process has gone forward. But thank you. Looking forward to what's next for SiteForge, and thank you to everyone online. Have a great rest of the day.